principal's persecution for his newly found religion resulted in him leaving behind his beloved home and family to travel to a rough and foreign landscape with other pioneers who were preserving to develop a new and safe community. This is the story of Jacob Spori. Welcome to the BYU-Idaho Roots of the Mighty Oaks podcast. I'm your host, Eden Rowe, and here we talk about the history of BYU-Idaho and how it applies to us today. The stories shared during this podcast are true, and they can help us understand and appreciate how BYU-Idaho became our beloved institution. Today we have the privilege of going back to the very beginning to learn about the man who was the first principal of the Bannock Stake Academy. This humble academy, a simple one-room log structure, would undergo many name changes throughout the years as it grew in student size and into multiple buildings before eventually becoming Brigham Young University, Idaho. Through sacrifice and dedication, Jacob Spori was one of the main reasons why the academy overcame challenges and didn't close in its early years. Jacob Spori's life is best summarized by two principles that he strived to live by. The first was that the gospel of Jesus Christ always comes first, and the second was to always foster a love for learning. He was born in 1847 in Switzerland, home to the beautiful Swiss Alps. Jacob grew up with loving parents who taught him about sacrifices and valuing education at a young age. Their ancestors were made up of a long line of educators. I can imagine this helped inspire him to follow in their footsteps. During his own pursuit of an education, his mother especially was an essential support. She selflessly sold her own household linens to help pay the cost of his education. And boy, did her sacrifices for his education pay off. Jacob graduated college with 2 degrees, one in mathematics, the other in music and art, and he didn't stop there. Jacob continued to love learning throughout his life. Decades later, he earned another degree in metallurgy, which is the study of metals and their properties. He spent most of his life teaching and encouraging others to embrace learning, too. His first few jobs out of college were teaching elementary and later secondary education. Eventually, he accepted a position that took him back to his high school in Oberville, Switzerland, this time as the principal. In addition to working within education, he was also selected to serve on various town and religion councils, and was elected by the townspeople to serve as the city clerk. He was well respected and loved in the community. That is, until his love of learning led Jacob to what would eventually become his greatest passion in life, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Jacob was introduced to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by missionaries when he was 30 years old. The restored gospel answered many burning questions and concerns Jacob had wrestled with previously. He had been troubled by the differences and bitterness between groups within the Christian faith he was a member of. In Jacob's words, he wrote,
"Many terrible things were said about this people, the Mormons. I fully expected this, knowing that all the powers and lies of darkness would be rushed to the battle once God initiated the restoration of all things. As a teacher and servant of the people, I was responsible to you and all my fellow men to thoroughly examine this new message. After many weeks of study, biblical comparisons, prayer, and exhausting, lonely, thought-filled nights, God led me to the truth, exactly as promised in James 1:5 and John 14:21-23.
When he decided to be baptized, Jacob's family and friends tried effortlessly to convince him otherwise, but he couldn't walk away from what he knew to be true. Jacob was persecuted relentlessly by his once friendly community because of his new faith, to the point that school officials ordered an investigation of Jacob's competence and right to teach. Jacob offered his own resignation to the school, and his teaching contract was canceled. Not long after, he lost his position as city clerk when he was overwhelmingly voted out of office. Jacob was unemployed for several months after this, before accepting a job from the church to act as an immigration agent. This ultimately led Jacob to make a very difficult decision. Not uncommon for other converts in similar situations, Jacob chose to leave his home in Switzerland and his family, including his wife and daughters, to join the saints in Utah. While Jacob's wife, Magdalena, didn't understand or share her husband's belief in the church, she continued to support him from afar. She would write letters to him in secret while they were apart and send him money to support him and his endeavors. She and their children were often on Jacob's mind. After leaving Switzerland, Jacob arrived in Logan, Utah in 1879 at age 32. Although he was highly educated, there was no use for his teaching or linguistic abilities when he first arrived. So Jacob continued to learn different skills and trades. He found work at a railroad station and a sawmill and studied at Brigham Young Academy in Provo, Utah. It was hard to adapt to his new life, but he gave it his best effort. In 1884, he had to learn to adapt and follow God's will even more as he was called to serve a mission in Turkey. This meant that he had to teach his new religion in a new language, in a different country and culture. Determined to do his best, he shockingly learned Turkish in just 3 months. Turkish wasn't the only language he taught the gospel in. He also gave lessons in English, French, and German. According to his daughters, at the end of his life, he could speak 9 languages and read and write in 13. After his mission in Turkey concluded, he was called to another mission. In July of 1886, he served as the first missionary in this dispensation in Haifa, Palestine. There he found many people who were receptive to the church's teachings, and Jacob performed the first baptism in Palestine. But sadly, not every moment on his mission resulted in joy. During his service, he received a letter from his wife about the death of their oldest daughter, Catherine, who died from a tragic swing accident. In a letter, Magdalena shared with her husband some of her feelings.
I feel so depressed and lonely since the funeral. I cannot express my feelings. Life seems so poor and tiresome, and at the end thereof is death, alike for all. Sometimes I feel, if I had stayed single, then I would have to care for myself only. The sin and the pain of this world, the latter touching my dear child, seems to stare me in the face accusingly for bringing children into existence.
When Jacob received these distressful letters, he responded with one of his own, emphasizing the hope and healing the restored gospel gives to him through teachings about life after death. As Magdalena learned about the plan of salvation, she felt a glimmer of hope. She began to investigate the church on her own, and eventually, she was baptized. Jacob was finally reunited with his family in 1887, which meant they were apart for 8 years, with only a few brief visits during that period. Their stay in Switzerland was short, as a new call was given to the Spori family. They were told about different schools the church was building, including one in the Snake River area by Dr. Carl G. Mazer in Idaho. Jacob was among those highly recommended to lead it. He was asked by the president of the church, John Taylor, to be a part of the endeavor, under the direction of the local stake president, Thomas E. Ricks. Without hesitation, the family packed up and moved to the United States, leaving Switzerland forever this time. They obediently and determinedly left their home to help increase the early saints' opportunities in obtaining an education. When they arrived to Rexburg, the city had been established just 5 years earlier, but was growing steadily. The school's opening was delayed because of some roof problems, but it officially opened on November 12, 1888, and was called the Bannock Stake Academy. It had 1 room and 3 teachers, Jacob being one of them, in addition to the school's principal as well. The teachers put up curtains across the room to divide the room into 3 spaces where they could teach. It must have been very noisy. Despite limited resources and little space, Jacob gave everything he had to the students and the school. With an education like his, you would think he was teaching high-level, intense subjects. But because of the humble circumstances of his students, Bannock Stake Academy only taught elementary-level subjects. The 3rd year the school was open, they ran into some major financial difficulties that looked like it would be the end of the academy. But Jacob remembered a blessing given at the opening of the academy, that the teachers, the academy, and future years of the institution would be blessed. He was not going to give up. Jacob donated his own teaching salary to the school in addition to donating money he received from other jobs he took up to keep the academy and community of learning alive. After serving as principal for a few years longer, Jacob asked if he could step down so he could save up money for his own little family. President Wilford Woodruff personally wrote Jacob a letter to thank him for his hard work. He retired from being Bannock Stake Academy's first principal in 1891. Jacob Spori continued to love learning and taught at other schools for the rest of his life. Just 2 days before he died, on September 27, 1903, at just 56 years old, Jacob was teaching a class of students. He helped encourage others to continue learning, no matter what level of education they were at, and always remained close to the Lord. You can feel the love that Jacob had for current and future students attending Bannock Stake Academy by the following quote that is commonly attributed to him.
The seeds we are planting today will grow and become mighty oaks, and their branches will run all over the earth.
The next time you walk by the Spori building, or if you're able to visit the beautiful landscape of the Swiss Alps, we invite you to take time to consider what attributes you want to be known for, and what values do you want to prioritize and hold close to your heart. What will you sacrifice for and dedicate your life to? For Jacob, it was pursuing an education and a relationship with God. For you, it could be anything. That's for you to decide. Thank you for listening to the Roots of the Mighty Oaks podcast. This episode has been produced and read by BYU-Idaho communications student Eden Rowe.